Welcome to the BIP Ventures Extraordinary Pursuits podcast, a fascinating and inspiring journey into the world of venture capital and startups. Each episode offers masterclasses and entrepreneurial stories from some of the top minds in the innovation economy. Get ready to unlock new ideas and gain valuable advice for how to thrive as an innovator and an investor. Today on Extraordinary Pursuits, we talk with John Yates, a partner and chair of the technology group at Morris, Manning & Martin LLP, one of the leading law firms in the country. John is a pioneer in technology law who has practiced exclusively in the area since 1981 and launched the firm's technology practice more than 35 years ago. Under his leadership, the practice has represented more than 1,000 tech companies and offers comprehensive legal and corporate services to startups, growing tech companies, and investors. In addition, John co-founded and has been a board member of a long list of leading technology organizations and is a nationally ranked lawyer in the venture capital industry. He frequently speaks at conferences on technology law issues and is a prolific writer whose articles have been cited in the tech law area and major business publications. He's also called upon for his perspective on technology law and high-growth innovation companies. As you can expect, John's breadth and depth of experience make him one of the most trusted observers in the technology innovation space. We are so honored to have him join us today on this episode to talk about the development and progress of Atlanta and the Southeast as a center for technology innovation, lessons he's learned through working with founders since the 1980s, and what he expects to see from the deal environment. Let's get started. We are so delighted and honored to have you with us today, John Yates. You have been a part of the Atlanta technology and innovation ecosystem for decades. And I know I have been absolutely overwhelmed and thrilled to read your background and to learn more about you. And I'm sure that our listeners would love to hear a bit about your backstory. You have so many decades of knowledge to share, and also how you've come to be so incredibly dedicated to innovation in our region. So if you would, please take a couple minutes, introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And thank you and BIP for this podcast and for that warm introduction. I guess when I was a wee lad and I started out, I actually took computer programming courses in high school back in the 70s. And my sister, who was 3 years older than I am, did the same thing. She said, "John, you need to get involved in computers." Well, roll the clock forward. She was 3 years ahead of me at Duke. When she graduates from Duke in 1979, she moves straight to California and starts a technology company. When I got out of law school there in 1981, two things happened that were instrumental. One is I went out and visited my sister and saw what was going on in Silicon Valley. And two is the IBM PC, personal computer, was introduced. So 1981 was a plant a flag in the ground, was the beginning of time in the computer industry. And what I saw was an unbelievable, fast-growing environment in the Valley. But I also concluded I wasn't moving to California. I just got married, and my wife and I, our family, were all on the East Coast. So I said, let's go to Atlanta. It's a great community. We don't know much about Atlanta, but we know it's big. We know it's the capital of the Southeast. We'll stay here for a while. Maybe we'll move to California, New York, or some other place. But we all know what happened. 43 years later, we're still in Atlanta, and really saw the benefits of Silicon Valley and tried to bring those into the Atlanta community and build out a practice. So we've been very fortunate to be able to do that. And it's just been a great community for purposes of growing a tech law practice, but also being around an unbelievably supportive tech ecosystem.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think there are so many of us who have been in the innovation community in Atlanta who tell similar versions of that story. I know we're 25 years settled, and I moved here right as the internet was kind of coming online. And worked in that, and so parallel paths slightly behind you, but I can agree, it has been an amazing place to build. So, let's talk a little bit about what you have built. The reputation of Morris, Manning and Martin is wide reaching, and you have been integral to the growth and success of the firm. I'd love to hear a little bit about what the firm does, what you do within the firm, and the role that Morris, Manning and Martin plays in this incredible ecosystem we have going.
Well, it's very unique in the sense that the ecosystem consists of different players, and the lawyers are obviously part of that. But one of the things we learned and decided early on was we needed to do more than just be a vendor. We needed to be a partner for tech companies, especially in the Southeast, where a lot of these resources are not just available in every corner. It's not like Silicon Valley, where you can go into a bar and meet 5 venture capitalists. Here, you got to run around and go pretty far to find a venture capitalist. So what we did was we said, let's build out a unique platform. And from one perspective, we said, let's make sure we have all the legal services covered that need to be covered. So we knew, because we were working on some deals initially with California law firms, we knew what those areas and disciplines were. We knew that we had to be able to cover all the subject matter topics because we needed to be able to service a company and their needs as they grew as an entrepreneurial business. And we also needed to move very rapidly deal going, because time's the enemy of the deal, and you got to be able to have the resources to get the deal done quickly. So over a period of time, frankly, the last 20 years, we built that out. But then we also said, let's go beyond that. Let's be this partner with our clients. And the partner really means you're part of their customer success team. You're helping them succeed. You're doing things that they don't expect you to do, but that shows your relationship to the company. And that includes things like helping them find management. We placed over 100 executives since I've been in the firm at no charge to our clients. We have a database of over 1,000 investors, angel, venture, growth, private equity, strategic. So we can take those and match those with our clients. And Atlanta is a great environment to also find prospective customers for clients. So we put that ecosystem together, that customer success ecosystem, lashed it into our legal services, and built this model out, which is out today, allowed us to represent now well over 500 technology clients throughout the United States and internationally.
Wow, that's really truly amazing. The concept of partnership is, one that, we certainly espouse as well. And, I think that it's an easy thing to say. And over the years, particularly with high growth companies, sometimes it's a really hard thing to do. You've kind of mentioned, that there's been 20 years of partnership. I understand that you have many more years, of dedication to these high growth technology companies. And so I'm curious if can kind of take that sort of 10,000-foot view and kind of describe what this opportunity environment looks like as you have worked with and partnered with and helped to grow these incredible companies.
Well, really, I think the key to a successful ecosystem is to have successful players there, and folks like BIP who've been around from the beginning to really capital to the organization. So, having sources of capital is really key, and we can talk a little bit more about the advantages of that, but also the challenges we have. And then finding the talent, and this is a real benefit we have. Georgia Tech is producing the talent; it's producing the widgets every single day. These intellectually talented assets, these people that we want to keep here. And then the other element of it is, frankly, an environment that attracts and retains these key entrepreneurs in these companies. It doesn't do us a lot of good to create an organization like Georgia Tech and then have the talent go elsewhere. We need to make sure it stays here. To keep it here, we need to have the money. And we also need to have the infrastructure. So these things all fit together, making Atlanta quite unique. And then what we can do, frankly, is to be in a position where, and this is what we've been doing for the last really 3 decades, we go out to other parts of the world and tell them about Atlanta and the Southeast. So we make trips to Boston. I'll be there in 2 weeks, spending a week in Boston, meeting 20 plus growth and private equity funds, We'll go to California. We brought the mayor and the governor of California before to meet with the key players, the big businesses there. We go to Los Angeles. We go to Washington. We go to Dallas. We basically go to these environments and say, look what we've got going on in Atlanta. Now, we also tell them what's going on in Morris, Manning, and Martin. We got 500 plus clients out there. We say, you need to come to Atlanta and see our environment because we have the ecosystem. Now, we have some challenges in that ecosystem as well, which we're addressing, but we've got a good governmental infrastructure. We're building out our physical infrastructure, addressing issues like water and some of the other challenges that we and other cities have, homelessness, affordable housing. But we're very focused on those kinds of issues. So I can't think of another city in the country that I have more hope for, more frankly, excitement and ability to grow that ecosystem either further than Atlanta.
So there are so many really intelligent people who are working on these types of things that you have been describing, the talent pipeline and retention and making Atlanta a great place to build companies and for people who are building companies to build families. Before we get to that, because that's a very big topic, I'm so curious to know, as you travel and you're in these other markets, particularly some of these markets that are more well established from the standpoint of being startup industry, markets and venture markets, what is their perspective of Atlanta?
The good news is it's a very positive perspective by and large. Now, there's some people that just won't ever move out of New York or Boston, and that's okay. But most of them say, listen, they see Atlanta as a real haven for entrepreneurial opportunity. And one of the things they really look at too is to say, look, you've got great companies. And part of it is you've got great companies that have bootstrapped themselves to certain levels. In other words, they haven't gone off and raised a whole lot of capital. They've raised some from some very good funds like yours and others, but they haven't gone off and raised this enormous amount of capital and then burned through it. Rather, they've been companies that have learned how to use the capital to grow. They've also found that this is a great community. And they say, look, one of the things we like about Atlanta is that people move there and they stay there. In other words, it's not hard for us to get people to move to Atlanta. It is hard for us to get people to move to New York or get people to move to Chicago. Oftentimes it's because, for different reasons, no offense to Chicago and New York, but it's cold there in the wintertime. And it's a much more hospitable environment here. And then the affordability issue, we are seeing more and more folks from the West Coast saying, look, we love Atlanta because it's a community too that's much more affordable. People feel like they can get a lot more for their money. And they feel like they are still very business friendly and very technology friendly. So we're seen as a great environment for people to come and be a part of this community, which is not true of every other city.
Yeah. No, I think that the recent Economist article that ranks Atlanta as, I think, the number two city in the United States speaks to a lot of those factors. So we recently were able to have a sit down conversation with Donnie Beamer from Mayor Dickens' office. And he talked about transforming Atlanta into a top 5 innovation region. And as part of that, he sort of mentioned that that requires close to a 10x increase in the number of companies that are launched here. That is an audacious goal. And so I would love to talk about that for a little bit. BCG did a report called Leveling Up that identified a lot of the areas that you've talked about, right? That are necessary for unlocking the success of, of a region. And they include city perception and recognition, like we were just discussing. The higher ed pipeline and talent, both production and retention. And you've mentioned Georgia Tech, but obviously Atlanta has a wealth of higher ed institutions. The startup infrastructure, funding availability. I'm curious to, talk a little bit about, which of those do you think are most critical to achieving this goal? And would you add anything to that list of priorities?
Those are great points. And I think that BCG study is really key. And I just literally got off the phone before our discussion with Donnie Beamer talking about this exact issue because it's front of mind for all of us. We want to be one of those top 5 cities. I would add one other key element here, and that is our community's ability to continue to not just attract and retain entrepreneurs, but keep them in the community after they're successful. In other words, have them here as angel investors working with funds like yours and others to help those companies grow as they expand. Because there's no substitute for a great mentor. It's by way of example, we've created a technology advisory council. Over the years, we've sold thousands of companies. And frankly, I've become friends with a lot of these entrepreneurs. And what I found was they'd come back to me, the entrepreneurs would say, listen, John, this is fantastic. I'm glad that you just helped us get this gigundous check. And I went off and I bought a boat and I bought a car, another car, and I bought, 3 homes. And I decided to buy a plane. I took flying lessons. I took golf lessons. I started a garden. And you know what? I really like being around entrepreneurs. So what I've decided to do, I have these houses everywhere, but I'm going to come back to Atlanta where I can tie into the entrepreneurs. So we've used this technology advisory council, which now is over 100 former executives. Every quarter we meet to tell them about what's happening in Atlanta. What are the new trends that are going on? Because when these entrepreneurs sell their companies, we want them coming back in, making investments, investing in funds like yours, being board members, being advisory council members. That's part of the vibrancy of this environment. And there's no substitute for this early stage entrepreneur than to have this mentor putting their arm around them and then have a fund like yours and others putting their arm around them to help these folks grow. So it's a big piece. The other piece that I think is really going to be important for us, we have some very, very successful companies, but the big difference between us and the Valley, for example, is the scale, the ability to scale quickly. And what you see in the Valley is they pour lots and lots of money in to allow a company to grow super fast. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to have 100 funds here like they do in the Valley. But what we have are good funds that are putting money in now, and we need to be able to attract those funds to come here. I don't think they're going to plant a flag here and say we're moving to Atlanta, but a lot of them have moved to Austin. And I think we can be more aggressive about suggesting that more and more of these funds come and have a presence here in our community so that they're integrated and tied in. And these are the bigger funds, the multi-billion-dollar funds that can really get us to the next level. So those are the things I think we need in order to really catapult that growth and be a top 5 tech community, tech ecosystem in the States.
That's fascinating. And I think, what I'm hearing is a couple of themes. I think one is, learning some of the things from these larger markets around the speed at which these investments are being made. And so having not just a cadre of good VCs, but flexible capital available for startups when they're at those inflection points and they can go, move quickly. But also this theme of partnership. John, this theme of partnership has come up from the moment we started talking. And, I think, whether it's this sort of synergistic community that you're building or the way in which you're talking about, even VCs like us coming alongside these founders and providing them with more than just a big bucket of money, that's really important. So I'm curious, over the the many years that you've been doing this, can you share anything about, especially for the founders who are listening to us, anything about the importance of spotting a good partner? This is a little bit off script, but I have a sense that you've got an amazing amount of wisdom to share on that theme.
Well, it's a great question, and one thing we ask frequently, because we have clients that will say, "Listen, I really would like to find somebody that can help me grow my business. What should I be looking for?" And it's sometimes different entrepreneurs, but I think 3 key areas. One is you find entrepreneurs that sometimes say, "Look, I've got a great idea, and I really know the market really well, but I don't really understand the financial side of things. I don't understand how to put this financial model, the pricing model together." And so I need to have a partner. Now, interestingly, some of the most successful companies in the tech area are not just single founders, they're co-founders. And there's a reason for that. They complement one another. But oftentimes we'll have a founder come to us and they say, look, I don't have that financial knowledge. And so we're fortunate, as you well know, that we have these fractional CFOs and fractional organizations that can help and be a part of it. And they're ingrained in our community here. So finance is really one of them because you really cannot succeed and grow if you don't understand the metrics. The second is the founder that comes to us and says, listen, I went to business school. I have a lot of knowledge. I know a balance sheet and an income statement. And, I understand what cap tables are. And I got this really great idea, but I'm not quite sure about the nature of the market itself. Well, what we'll do is we'll look into our tech advisory council and we'll say, okay, look, you're looking at the energy space. Let me introduce you to the former CIO of Southern Company. Or you're in the pharmaceutical space. Let me introduce you to this person as former drug executive. So somebody that can really help you with it, understand, is this really a problem that you're addressing or not? And then the third piece is frequently the founder that comes in and says, look, I'm a smart technical person. I really understand the technology, but I'm not a people person. I need to have somebody that really understands and can be Ms. or Mr. Outside. And so they're finding that right person. And we're fortunate in our community to have a lot of people in that. So part of it is just having this talent pool, not just from a technology and programming perspective, let's say, but also the talent pool for these other boxes on the org chart. And Atlanta is very fortunate that, including Fortune 500 executives that retire and they really know that space, and they can then come in and be board members or investors or otherwise help companies.
No, I think that's great. And I think, again, this idea that, what's important to growing as a top ecosystem is not only attracting, but retaining, because this model you're describing doesn't work if we're not retaining people. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about founders and investors. What do you think for founders? The really distinct advantages are to come here, build here. Presuming that maybe they haven't come up in the talent pipeline here. Why come?
Well, there's a general comment we make about founders seeking investors, and it's a little bit about interpersonal relationships. One is that once you bring a venture capitalist on, it's probably harder to divorce your venture capitalist than it is your spouse. All right, so you got to make the right choice, okay? Because it's really hard to get rid of them, and usually they get rid of you before you get rid of them. All right, so very important to keep that in mind as an entrepreneur. The second piece is, I guess it's a little bit like dating, is that, if you play hard to get, they are even more excited about wanting to be with you. All right. So what we see oftentimes are companies that come out and say, I need to raise capital. I got to raise it now. I'm in dire straits. We got to move forward. Very difficult situation can happen. And a lot of companies are in that mode, but frankly, you then narrow your resources down. So what we say about Atlanta and what we say about and counsel our clients is, look, before you go push that button and put yourself in play to raise them, get all those in place that you need. And in particular, what we also say is, imagine what it's going to be like in your first board meeting with an investor. And this is a different perspective from your first getting on stage and dancing around telling them how great your company is. Your first board meeting with your investor, you get to dance around for about 30 seconds. And then they say, we heard all that before. We don't want, tell us your pipeline. Tell us, what are your best few? What are the likelihood of getting those closed? Where are your forecasts? What if you don't meet them? What's the plan? Go through all those kind of details. And so we're telling these entrepreneurs, look, let's get you prepared. So literally your first interview with that investor, you're answering the questions they're going to be asking if they invested you in that first board meeting, or even worse, the second board meeting where you don't even get the 30 seconds to dance around on stage. So that's and Atlanta's a good environment for that, because we can pull people in from our technology advisory council who can sort of play that role with them as well.
No, I think that is such a good point. I think so often, particularly when you're in VC in a position to be the first institutional capital for a startup, it it seems like a big exciting thing. It is very much a business transaction. It is very much, knowing you know, what KPIs matter and, all of those things. I'm curious with this relationship between, VCs, you kind of talked about it being harder to divorce your VC than your wife. We talk about taking a longitudinal approach to investment. And one of the reasons for that is because the fundraising process can be so distracting for, high growth startups, particularly when they have so many other things to do. So, what have you seen? What is your counsel for this relationship between founders and investors, thinking about it from the long, with a long-term mindset?
That is a key question because a lot of times these entrepreneurs don't realize, just like people might not realize what it's like when you're married. Okay, so it's a different ball game. There's a lot of give and take, and so understanding what your partner's needs are and desires is really important for the entrepreneur to understand what that venture capitalist or what that investor is looking for. Unless it's a friend, a family, or a fool, it's generally going to be somebody that's looking to do this for a business, and they want a return on their investment. And so we find a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand there. They're thinking at a long-term perspective, and the investors are thinking, 3 to 5 to 7 years max, and then they got to get out of it. So that's number one. Number two is, I think, the idea also of appreciating the fact that the discipline that's required for the entrepreneur to dovetail properly with the investor is really important. There are, as you point out, there are KPIs, but there's a dashboard of information that you need to be able to prepare and complete. And you need to have pretty thick skin because these folks are pretty direct about the way they communicate with you. And then I think the third element is to be and this is really hard for entrepreneurs, to be a very good listener and to listen to what it is that these investors are telling you and not just discard it because not that they're always right, but we find many times an entrepreneur will sit there and think they know the market, they know everything about the technology, and they don't listen to the investor. And frankly, every single board meeting, every single meeting you have with an investor as an entrepreneur is a performance review. They're all performance reviews. And so we have seen countless situations where I'll go into a board meeting, we'll have the discussion, the entrepreneur will not be listening or will have not been prepared. We go into executive session. I'm still sitting in there as a lawyer, and the investors will do what they should do, which is to say, listen, the person didn't do the things we talked about, just run down the list of items. And so appreciating that fact is important. The other issue that I would suggest is so critical for the entrepreneur is no surprises. It doesn't mean you're not going to have some hiccups, because you will. We should. Frankly, if you're stretching, you're going to have hiccups. But what you need to be aware of is if you're going to have a hiccup, you don't wait to the board meeting to tell them about it. So you got to figure out how you vet that issue. We missed the revenue number. We weren't able to release the product on time. We have this major customer problem. Contact the investor in advance and ask for their guidance. Seek to have them as part of the solution to the problem. Don't try to hide it, because these are very smart people. Particularly, I know the folks in your fund can be able to they can spot a problem a mile away, but engage them in helping to solve the problem rather than somehow think you're going to sneak it by them at a board meeting, because you won't.
Yeah, that you make so many good points there. And I think, you know, one of the things that I have heard, actually in a recent interview for the podcast with one of our founders, was that one of the pieces of feedback that she received during one of these sessions, she initially was like, that can't be right. It was a piece of guidance that we were providing. And she's like, that can't be right. And she said, and I walked away and I was a little frustrated. And then I thought, no, they're my partner. They're giving me guidance because they know something I don't, and I need to think about this. And she said, by God, they were right. And it transformed the business. She listened, to your point. She listened She thought about it, she implemented it, and then she moved forward. And they've had a really, really excellent trajectory, like 0 to massive. And, that's allowed them to make impact and solve the kinds of problems that they got in the business to solve in the first place. So you make really good points there about being a little thick-skinned, listening well, and remembering that these VCs are your partner. So let's talk about the VC environment for a little while. I think that the market has been really uncertain and a little inconsistent over the last few years. Thank you very much, COVID and inflation and all of those other things. Um, what's your perspective on the funding environment, particularly in the Southeast?
You started out by mentioning that I've been doing this for 43 years. And so I have seen the ups and downs over and over and over again. And I've seen every down has an up. Okay. I've yet to see one where it's just stayed down. So we're already seeing the transformation and moving up. So the way to really gauge that are the number of deals that are being done and the valuation built into that. So we're seeing the deal flow pick up for sure, for sure. The other positive element here is that these funds, that's what they do. They're in the business of selling money. And so they have a lot of inventory sitting on the shelf, money. They've got to sell it. With all due respect to funds, and I love funds, but basically I tell our clients, I said, look, their job is to deploy the capital. The last thing they want to do is go out and have your job. They don't want to go take over companies and become the CEO of your business. That is not what they're interested in. So don't be worried about that. But think about how you're going to position your company to fetch the highest valuation. And again, sort of this is playing hard to get. Say, look, wait to position your company to where you're able. And I was just telling somebody literally, earlier today, said you want to build your company to a point where the inflection point, the point of where they cross, is building your company to a point where now you need the capital to scale at a faster pace, but being able to fetch the highest valuation at the right growth rate, then bringing that capital in so that you can then grow up more rapidly. So I'm very optimistic about it. I'm seeing the uptick. I think what the Fed is doing is, and we had heard Raphael Bostic, the CEO of the Atlanta Fed, at the Atlanta Rotary Club. I had him speak several months ago, and he said, "Look, we're not gonna go raise rates, lower rates, raise rate, lower rate. We're gonna raise them, and we're gonna make a gradual decrease." And that's exactly what's happened. So, but they're not going to decrease rates and then in an environment where they think they're going to raise them. So we think they're going to be clicking down. We think the market's going to come back. We're already seeing deal flow activity, and we're seeing funds that are saying we have got to deploy this capital, even if it's not at the valuation we had previously. So I'm very bullish and optimistic.
That's awesome. I love that. And I think we're going to start to wrap up on an optimistic note here. I'd be curious to just get one last piece of advice from, a technology and funding optimist. What would you leave a founder with in terms of a piece of advice around how to build an enduring technology innovation company?
Well, it's interesting. It's a piece of advice that I would probably give to anybody, but it's particularly true for entrepreneurs. And I've mentioned this to folks many times, but it's to be a good person and in the end, to give back to others and help others. And if you take that mentality as an entrepreneur, you're going to be taking that mentality with regard to your customers, with regard to your employees, with regard to your partners, and people will want to do business with you. Because I've seen over the years, there are some very, very successful people who have not taken that attitude. And frankly, they're not very happy. And rather those folks that maybe they're not the billionaires, but they've done well and they're satisfied with their life. They've helped other people be successful, and they've helped their community to be successful. And as I tell entrepreneurs, as you look back through your career, when you're 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you look back, what did you accomplish? If you can basically point out you didn't just make a boatload of money, that's nice, but you really helped a lot of other people in the process, that's going to give you even the greatest level of satisfaction. So in making decisions, thinking it through that way, not how you can always, get the upper hand or take advantage of the other person, but doing the right thing. And we all know you can't always be thinking that way, but if you are that way, when you finally get to a point where you're ready to hang up your cleats, I think you'll feel good about it, and you will have made a lot of people happy in the process.
I don't think we could end on a more apropos note, given your long history of being a good person and serving the community and giving back, creating partnership everywhere you go, it seems, across so many different sectors. So that's a wonderful piece of advice. I am so grateful for your time, John, and I'm sure that everyone who is listening has walked away with a golden nugget. How can people find you, follow you, and continue to learn from this wisdom that you're willing to share?
It's interesting. First of all, our website has information. My email address is jyates@mmmlaw.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn, and I will tell you one little secret for you, for all the listeners, and that is, as you get older, your connections and relationships they just deteriorate. Some of them, frankly, move on to higher pastures. What I have found is if you can build your LinkedIn connections, it is amazing how you can maintain the level of youthfulness too. So connect to me on LinkedIn, look at my posts, which I try to make informative, and communicate through that form of social media. And I've just found LinkedIn to be most valuable. And I'm always open to listening to people and seeing how I can pay it forward. So if you've got an interesting idea, if I can't help you, at least I can try to find somebody that can.
That's a wonderful yes and. Thank you, John, for your time and for all you've done for our community.
Thank you, Michelle. We appreciate it. It's been great. Thank you for what you and BIP have done. You've been key players, and you really have been the key performers in helping us to find a fuel for the entrepreneurial engine here.
Awesome partnership.
Thanks for listening to the BIP Ventures Extraordinary Pursuits podcast. Check the show notes on our blog for the resources we discussed. You can find Extraordinary Pursuits on your favorite audio platform. Be sure to subscribe to the BIP Ventures YouTube channel and connect with us on LinkedIn, X, and Instagram so you get all the stories, learnings, and ideas for ways to thrive in the innovation economy. And if you liked this episode, be generous. Share it